without limits or judgment. A place for you and people like you to tell your most effed up stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we have a special guest with us. His name is Brenton Sawin, and he's going to share with us a story that he has with a creature that you probably have never heard before. It's called a Dero. It's actually something that I myself couldn't find a lot on, so it'll be interesting for you folk who look for different and far out there paranormal subjects. But before we start, if you have any paranormal stories, pictures, videos, or any media whatsoever, and you want to get it on our show or on our website, please go to www.effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to submissions, fill out the form, and submit that to us. And it'll be more than likely on our website, possibly in a podcast. So, yes, we appreciate all of your submissions. And without further ado, welcome, Brenton, to the show.
Well, thank you, Will, and thank you, Ryan. I've been looking forward to coming on here and talking about this. And the Darrow thing was something that was a mystery to me when I had the encounter. I had no idea there was such a thing, and I really didn't even know what to think about it for years. And it was 15 years later, I was reading a book just by chance that someone gave me called I Remember Lemura, and they had some drawings and a few encounters that other people had. And when I saw the drawing, it really just blew my mind because it took me back 15 years ago when I'd seen this creature or this man. It looked like a man, except for the nose. He had a long pendulous nose that hung down to about his chest, and it swung around, but I'll explain that here in a minute. And so most people haven't heard of it, and when I posted it on YouTube, that story, I had a lot of people that basically watched it and said they'd never heard of it, and of course it was a pretty famous story back in the 50s through a man who had encountered these beings named Richard Shaver, and he sent a story into an editor for a magazine at the time, and his name was Ray Palmer, and Ray Palmer took this man's story and then put it into a magazine, but he changed the story up to make it more into a story instead of just a straight out encounter that this man had. So
let's travel back 15 years to your encounter.
All right. Yes, I lived in Texas, and it was 1989. Ronald Reagan was president at the time. You kind of just take people back, to that time period. And as I said, I was living in Whitesboro, Texas. Ironically, the street was Elm Street. So it kind of stood out in my mind as a Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, I bet.
All those years. But I was around 20 years old. I'd have to do the math to get exactly around 20, 21. And I worked in construction at the time, pouring concrete, and it was summertime because I remember I just caught a 8-pound bass, and I even tell that story in the video that I have, and most people said, I believe your story, but I don't believe you caught the 8-pound bass. So, but anyway, they'll believe anything but the fishing story. But I woke up one morning and I was thinking about, it was a weekend, I didn't have to go to work, and I was thinking about maybe going fishing again, trying to catch another fish, because that kind of gets you hooked once you catch a nice bass, like that. And so I lit up a cigarette, and I was smoking a cigarette, thinking about the day, and just waking up, and I was sitting up in bed, and I finished the cigarette, and I put it out in the ashtray to my left. I had a little nightstand there with an ashtray, and when I put the cigarette out, all of a sudden my arm was twisted behind my back, and instantly I thought, oh no, not again, because I had an encounter when I was 5 years old, and I thought I was going to look over and see the same kind of thing, but anyway, I was thinking back, and I was really kind of starting to get afraid, and I just eased over and looked up, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. My mind just couldn't interpret it, and it was a man looking. It looked like a man, and maybe like 60 years old, like older too, and he had this nose that came down, and it hung all the way down to his chest, and around the nose area it was blue, like maybe 3 or 4 inches out on each side, out to the cheekbone area, and it looked like a baboon's butt, is what I thought at the time. Blue looking, and it was creased, and this thing was laughing at me with a really odd honking type laugh. It was like honk, 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 and it was so bizarre that I was basically almost like a hypnosis type thing, with that nose swinging back and forth as he laughed, and his chest came in and out from the laughing action. His nose kind of swung back and forth, like you would take in a hypnosis session or something, and swing a watch back and forth. That's kind of what his nose was doing. And I was just looking and just soaking in every detail of this being, and I didn't know what to think. So I was extremely in shock, really, and fear was setting in. And then out of the blue, this thing had something in his hand that looked about like the size of a grill lighter. And shaped like that, but more high-tech looking. It wasn't a grill lighter, but he had that little instrument in his hand. The only thing I can say to have a person visualize it would be that it looked like about the size of a grill lighter, in the shape of a grill lighter. And he took it and he stuck it to my temple on the side of my head, on the left side that he was standing on, and I don't know what the thing was. I don't know if it was some kind of weapon or what it was. But when he stuck that to the side of my head, I seen a doorway open up in my room. And my room was about 12 feet wide. So when this doorway opened up, it was kind of up in the corner of the bedroom and toward the front of me. Because this thing was standing on my left side, and when he stuck it to my head, he was kind of pushing my head over where I was looking straight ahead.
So just to clarify, when you say a door open, we're not talking about a physical door in the room. We're talking about like a doorway to another dimension. Open.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was kind of up above. There was a closet door over in the front direction in front of me, and this doorway opened up kind of above that closet door, and it looked like, if you were to estimate how far away that door was, it was probably 75 feet away, but my room is only 12 feet wide. So something was going on. As I reflect back and I think about this, they did something to alter time space to where a doorway can open up 75 feet away and it be only in a 12-foot enclosure.
So you say that you were lying in bed and you turn to the left to put out your cigarette, and this thing just appeared in front of you and grabbed your arm.
He appeared beside me in such a way that I didn't even see him. I put the cigarette out and I turned my head back looking forward, and then next thing I know, he had my arm and he put me in an arm lock. And I never even seen him come in. He just appeared there or something. I have no idea how he got in. Matter of fact, when he had my arm, he had me in that arm lock. I had not seen him yet, and that's why I was kind of paranoid to look over, because it felt familiar. The atmosphere felt strange. And I'd had one encounter when I was 5 years old, and I remember how the atmosphere felt like electrical charged and just felt odd, and time didn't feel the same, and that kind of thing. And so he caught me off guard. He was very good at what he does, I'll tell you that. You know?
Okay, so you're looking down at the end of your room, 12 feet away. There's a doorway that appears about 75 feet away from you.
Right, correct, yes.
So you're obviously your perceptions of, or at least your perception of reality and time has been altered, or time and reality actually was altered.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now in this doorway, there was when I've looked on the internet and I've seen videos about shadow people. This being was a shadow person. He was like a solid figure, but it was solid shadow, and that's about the best way anyone could describe that. And he was standing in the doorway, and the light was in where he was on the other side of the door, so he was kind of backlit. And also, it was like yellowish looking light coming through the opening that was the door or the portal. And this creature, shadow being, was standing in that doorway. So now I'm thinking, oh my goodness, not only do I have some weird creature with me in an arm bar and he stuck something to my head, but now I've got a doorway that's opened up and a shadow being is in it. And I had no idea that you would even call it a shadow being. I had no idea about any of this kind of stuff. I'd never read on it, never entertained any stuff like that, never ghost stories or nothing. I always just thought that was a bunch of nonsense, other than the experience I had when I was 5, and I tried to put that out of my mind and convince myself that I had dreamed or something. But anyway, the being was standing there in the doorway, and he shape-shifted into a sinister-looking stance. His stance changed. I'm sorry, you all.
It's okay.
Didn't think about that.
I actually just turned the ringer off on my phone about 2 seconds before yours rang.
And I did about a minute or two before that. So I guess we're all kind of, didn't think ahead.
We're just not as popular. We don't usually get phone calls.
Yeah, I make a point of never giving out my number unless I have to.
Right. Okay. Well, I stuck the phone in the hallway there. So, well, anyway, this being, the standing in the doorway, he shifts into like a sinister stance. He didn't shapeshift into a different shape, because he stayed in a human-looking form, but he contorted in areas that there wasn't even joints, and just I can't even explain the kind of stance that creepy-looking, weird stance that he got into. It was like the most evil, sinister looking position that a human form could even stand in. And then it scared me really bad. I mean, I was extremely terrified and in shock. And when these kind of things happen, you kind of go into a shock mode to where it's almost like not even fear because you're in shock, but it's fear that's so fearful that you can't even have time to be scared because you don't know what to do. You don't know what to even try to run or whatever. And when you're in an arm bar and you can't move, it's even worse. So I'm trying to comprehend what's going on and not even knowing what to do to react.
And that's a very important point. And for anybody who hasn't been in a situation where they've been presented with something that is outside of your everyday experience, we all watch movies and this and that, and we say, oh, I would do this or I would do that. But I can tell you from experience, unless you are presented face to face with something that you do not understand, it's almost, and I describe it, I'm not going to go into the exact situation, but I've experienced something where, my brain couldn't comprehend what was happening right away. And I likened it, I remember thinking that it was like my brain was short circuiting. Everything was like kind of flashing, kind of strobing for a second, and the event was so obtrusive and so out of the ordinary that I could feel my brain sputtering, trying to make sense of the situation so that it could react. And it's whenever you're presented with something that is so far outside the norm, physiologically, your brain cannot process the information. It has to find a reference point before it can do anything. And if it's nothing that you've experienced before, then it is very difficult to kind of snap yourself out of that and take action. And sorry to interrupt, but I feel it necessary to point this out sometimes when people bring that up.
I'm glad you did, and I'm glad that you interjected there because that's true. And I think even a lot of times when something like this happens, that the person doesn't even talk about it for a while, sometimes years, because you don't even. And a lot of times people even forget it for a while. The immediate future, the short term, they forget it and remember it later because the brain has a defense mechanism, I believe, that would block such a traumatic thing out for at least for a little while. Because after this had happened, I didn't even mention it to anyone other from when I called help that I'll tell about here in a minute. I called for help, but I didn't talk about it to anyone because I didn't even really know what to tell them.
And that's very similar with abductee cases, where I remember there was this one, like, was it John and Jack Wiener? Something like that anyway, and it was like 4 of them out in the woods or canoeing, and they got abducted. And I remember at the end of their story, they actually, they just went back to camp. They never talked about it the next day. They just went home
and that's what stood out to me in that story, Will, is that I noticed that they said that they didn't talk about it and they all just went to bed. And that's exactly what people tend to do. And I don't.
And it's what you wouldn't expect. Like you would think that you would talk about it and try to analyze what just happened, but they don't. It's like it's very out of character for what you think would happen. And I guess just like your case here, it's something that you didn't talk about. It's like for whatever reason, when one of these very outlandish situation happens, you don't want to process it, you don't want to think of it, and like you said, it's probably your brain's mechanism to block it out because you're just not ready to deal with it.
Yes, and many people that have these kind of experiences, I think they have PTSD afterwards, and that I believe can block out memories, and people that are victims of abuse sometimes have memory loss and they remember it later in life. And I was going to tie this into the 5-year-old, the thing that happened when I was 5, and just so people can kind of understand, if you've had these things happen to you, you're not alone, and there is things you can do about it, and there's other people that experienced it, and it's something that is more. Really, there's a lot of people that have experienced odd and paranormal activity that they don't talk about it because it's kind of embarrassing, and it took a lot of guts for me to even post this story, and I was regretting it at first, but I'm so glad that I did now, because it's really turned into something where I have a lot of contact with people who contact me with their stories and what have you. And anyway, I was going to get back to this event. We have this being that's in this doorway, and he shifted into this sinister looking shape. And here I am freaking out. I've got two beings here now, and a doorway opened up to I don't even know where, And at this time I was young, I was naive, I'd never even heard of such things in my life, and I thought ghost stories was kind of, I was on the fence about even believing such a thing as that, and and you just wasn't something I ever thought about. Well, when that door opened and he shifted, there was something that happened that topped everything, and it came from off to my right, and I, you would think, how do you know what direction? But there was a roar that happened, and the roar was so terrifying. Like if you ever watched Jurassic Park and you heard the T-Rex roar, and it's a crazy sound. And I remember watching that movie. It's like, wow, boy, that would be so scary. And that sound, if you were in real life, it would be so massive of a roar that you would probably just drop dead, or run, or what I'm saying. You'd probably be in shock. And well, this roar happened, and it went on, and it was just so loud and so massive that I remember thinking when I heard this roar that if you were to see this creature that is making this roar, you would surely die. I didn't even want to see it. I was so terrified that it was going to reveal itself and I was going to see. And I'm telling you, it was so bad that the shadow being that was in the doorway, because I was still looking forward in that direction because this was taking place kind of fast. I'm in an arm bar, and he's laughing at me, and then he sticks something to my head, and then and then a doorway opens up, and the creature shifts into a sinister looking stance, and then this roar happens, and I felt like it came off from my right, and like if you were trying to put a direction to everything. And the being that was standing at the door, it scared him because he looked over to his left, which would have been is my right, but since he's facing me, it was his left. And I seen him instantly. He looked fast over to that direction, and I could tell by his stance he kind of even leaned back a little bit, like he was startled. And then all of a sudden, that doorway just went whoop and shut. And the being that had a hold of my arm, he let go of my arm, and I guess he teleported out or slipped into another dimension. However he did it, I think he used some kind of technology to do what he was doing. And anyway, this roar it went on for like a minute. I mean, and you think a minute's not a long time, but you take something and make a sound and try to make that sustain it for a minute. That's a long time. And so it just progressively for like 10 seconds built up fear, 15 seconds built more fear, and it was just so traumatic. It's so terrifying that it ran both of these creatures off, and they were scared of whatever made that roar. And I'm telling you, it was more scary than the Darrow that had a hold of me, and it was more scary than the being that was in the doorway.
So how did you get out of that situation?
That roar scared them off.
But did that roar come for you?
That's a little bit of a mystery. I don't know for sure. Now, here I am. I'm so scared, and this is the only thing I can maybe think of is that this was such a bad event for me that I didn't even stay in that house another night. I got my clothes together, and I left right then. I mean, I didn't even get all my stuff. I was like, I'm not staying in this house. I'll never sleep in this house again. And I immediately grabbed my stuff up and I left. And I called for my roommate when all this roar was happening. I was yelling for my roommate. And in the video, I'd say Bob, but that's not his name. But I didn't want to bring his name into it. And I was just yelling, Bob, Bob, and it took forever for him to get there. But all of a sudden, the door slung open. And I said, did you hear that? And he could tell I was just extremely freaked out and scared. And he said, no. So somehow or another, these things are able to encapsulate you into whatever they're doing, like you're in a sphere of some kind, an enclosure that this activity has taken place in. And they can isolate the area and do whatever they're wanting to do. And so I
have to ask, Brenton, did you look to your right ever?
Yes, I did. I did look to the right. Yes, that was the first thing I did after I heard the roar, and I seen that the shadow being freaked out. I looked over to the right, and there was nothing there, just the wall. My bed was up next to the wall, and all there was of that was just the sound. And I'm telling you, it was the scariest. If you could reproduce that sound, you could have a movie that would be so scary that it'd make millions. I wanted to try to make, find a sound that would match it, but I could never find anything, so I didn't put any sound to it in the video because it wouldn't have done it justice.
So would you describe it as a sound that would be made from something that would be organic or something mechanical?
Yes. And when it made the sound, I thought of instantly, and my mind just went there. I thought that it was the beast that the Bible talks about that comes out of the ocean at the end of time.
The Leviathan.
Yes, correct. That's what I thought. That's where my mind went anyway. Whether it was or not, I don't know. But I thought if you were to see it, and I'm not kidding you, I can't even stress this enough. I thought if you were to see that, if your eyes were to look at what made that sound, you would die.
It would just shatter your mind and you would die. Yeah.
So yes, you would freaking just have a heart attack and stroke out.
Very Lovecraftian.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because everything with Lovecraft is like the unnameable, the impossible angles. It's all things that you can't comprehend and drives you mad, right?
The mind-shattering aspect of the unthinkable elder things.
So how did... Like when you're in the room, you're hearing this roar, and it scares off the shadow man. It scares off the Darrow. How did you get from that moment to when you got out of there? Did you just get up in the middle of the roaring and leave the room?
No. I was yelling for my roommate during the roaring. After it went on for about half a minute, I was so paralyzed in fear, I didn't do anything immediately. But once the roar happened, the other two things were gone. So once I wasn't in the armbar and the doorway wasn't opened, I felt a little safer to start screaming for help. And I mean, I was screaming for help. I imagine, I never did ask my roommate, what did you think about me screaming like that? I'm sure it sounded pretty bizarre to him, that I was just yelling in terror, And that's another thing, like you were talking about, Ryan, that you don't talk about it. And why? Well, he never did even ask me what happened, other than, when I asked him, I said, did you hear that? And he said, no. Hear what? And I didn't say anything. It's just unbelievable.
Well, it's interesting that, like, he obviously, he heard you screaming to help to get, he came to the room and he heard you screaming, but he Eventually, but he didn't hear the roar.
Right, and it might be because of the beings. I didn't start screaming for help until the Darrow was gone. Now, he had technology, now, and I didn't know what to make of that kind of thing because, I'm a Christian, and so where to even classify that, I didn't even know where to begin to classify it. So I shut it out of my mind because this being is extra dimensional. He's able to go in and out of dimensions. But he brought with him something that was tangible, physical technology that he stuck to my head. And the only thing I can think about that is similar to that is a doctor called, his name is Michael Persinger, who created the God helmet, and it's basically a helmet that has magnets on the inside of the helmet, and he can put this helmet on a person and trigger the the magnets on the temporal lobes right where that thing stuck it to my head. He can turn that magnet on and bombard your cranial, your frontal lobe with magnetic energy, and he can make you. He says he can make you perceive or make you hallucinate, see other beings, or feel that other beings are around and things. Which I think he is shutting off the natural mind, and your spirit mind is taking over. Because if your mind, body, and spirit, when I look into what the scriptures say about it, it basically says you have two different minds. You have your spirit man and you have your flesh man. And he was at this being, I believe, and Michael Persinger are shutting off your physical brain, and you're perceiving with what some people would call the third eye or whatever it is, and that's what I think, that somehow they had encapsulated and changed the dimension that I was in. It overlaps into my dimension. They bring theirs with them, and so
perhaps it was like taking down the fourth wall, kind of like people, shamans, and people who like way back or in other cultures when they would use hallucinogenic mushrooms, is not not necessarily that it's all hallucinations, but they can. Ryan, you're probably better at explaining this since you've delved so deep into it. But
well, part and parcel of the psilocybin cubenzi effect on the mind. As one scientist I heard talking about it, he described it as the chemicals are very similar to the tryptamines that your brain uses. They plug into certain neuroreceptors that actually inhibit the brain's natural filter function. And people always ask me, what do you mean? And I say, well, you use your remote control for your TV every day. How many buttons are on it? And nobody knows how many buttons are on the remote because your brain automatically decides that that's useless information. And that's where the filter comes in. So things like these magnets or certain psychotropic chemicals that are found in hallucinogenic plants and mushrooms can interrupt this filter system and perhaps give one insight into a world that your brain usually hides from you in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I believe that, Ryan. I do. Because I think that people have perceptions that they're not willing to use, and that's why people, when you're a kid, you have more experiences typically.
Precisely.
Yeah, and as we get older, we think, well, this other stuff is foolishness, so we, in a way, we lock it out, and then
I think a lot of it may have had something to do with, for the flesh and blood man, he had to dodge woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers, whereas the spirit world wasn't too impactful on their day-to-day hunting and gathering, and over the course of selective behavioral modification that we call culture, we've moved away from any of the, or a lot of these spiritual experiences, and focused culturally and behaviorally on the 3D world.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
I agree with you on that, because you don't need that other stuff on day-to-day life typically, and when you have something that happens in that area, it basically causes you to end up thinking about it, and I was going to also say, when I left that house, I went back to my Pawpaw's house, my grandfather, and when I went in the house, this was what was bizarre, because I never heard Pawpaw ever praying or talking about God hard. He might have mentioned it some, but it just wasn't something he ever talked to me about. But when I went in the house, he was praying, and he was extremely like in a distraught state, saying, "Thank you, God, for saving him." And he was like, saying, "Bless you, Lord, for protecting him and saving him and sending him back." And he was praying, and I went to like a Pentecostal church before, and he was praying in what sounded like a different language. And I'm not even really in agreement with that kind of thing. Maybe that's what opened the door. I don't know, but that's what he was doing, and it was that was even shocking to me because I'd never heard him say that anything or do anything like that. So I didn't know maybe if as I thought back on it, it's like, was he praying? Like did he have some kind of premonition that I was going to be in trouble and he was praying for me, or? And I didn't ask, and that's another thing, like you were saying, Ryan. Why do we keep it such a secret? I guess because it's so crazy sounding, you don't want to be labeled as crazy. But I should have felt safe enough to ask him. Why was you praying like that? What was going on?
Well, I think it definitely has to do with a built-in self-preservation mechanism, because whenever you experience anything that's I like the term paradigm shifting. Anything that's going to shift your worldview away from, let's face it, we're very cyclic creatures. We live in a world that is 24 hours. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, the stars come out, the stars go away, the seasons pass. And we get used to our habits, and we build those very strong connections in our brains. And then when you have something that completely flies in the face of that day-to-day cycle experience, that have a very habitual existence that we're very comfortable with, it completely breaks down all those connections. Well, if reality no longer makes sense, then the rest of the cycles can no longer work. If people can appear out of thin air and doorways can open up 75 feet away in a 12-foot long room, then nothing can make sense, and my whole worldview shatters. So I really do think that the human mind has these systems built in, and they do their damnedest to keep us from digging too deep at these memories and trying to bring them to the surface, because it just flies in the face of every other neural connection that exists in your brain, that to speak of it would begin to break down the structure that you have created in your mind.
Well, that's an important point to talk about, a structure that we've created. Because if we go back to the beginning, the idea that a child has more paranormal experiences, and we more develop that filter as we age. We filter out more as we grow up because it's not part of our system. Well, now you said that you had an experience when you were 5 years old.
Right.
So subconsciously, that was probably already in your head, somewhere, which would enable you to probably have never really filtered that out. You know what I'm saying? Because you already had the development there, and it's similar to abductees who would usually an abductee doesn't have one abduction experience. They have them repeatedly, and they start from a young age, and as they get older, they have more abductions, and sometimes this doesn't really come out until they notice strange marks on their body, missing time, and if it gets too worrisome, they'll get hypnotic regression done, and then they'll be able to go back and see these multiple times that they've been abducted and what actually went on. So in the subconscious, that's why they're still able to see certain things, perhaps because they haven't totally filtered that out, because they've had these experiences. So it's interesting if you mention the filter, because now, Ryan, we talked about this before, how most people who have paranormal experiences, they have multiple paranormal experiences, not one. They have multiple, and it's kind of throughout their life as if they're marked. Right?
And it's not always necessarily a UFO abductee
exactly
always sees UFOs. It's paranormal activity, strange cryptid creatures, Men in Black experiences,
They're-
lost time. I mean, it's the whole spectrum.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
tuned into a world that most people aren't. Now, is it possible that people who have this, again, we at a young age, they're put into these situations, and their filter never really filters over. They never develop that filter. They're always kind of open, so they always see it. But again, we're talking about tuned in. It's still there. We just filter it out. So is it possible that we're all always surrounded by paranormal events and entities? We just can't see it because we have it filtered out.
Yes, I believe so, and I believe that what that guy, that Darrow, stuck to my head made me see let me see into that realm, and he shut something off or turned something on, whatever the case is, and it made me see into that realm of something that was really there. Now, some people would say, "Oh, you hallucinated," but no, I really don't believe so, because I don't see why, if a person believes in God or they believe in evolution, I don't know why your brain would ever evolve with and that would be something that would be in natural selection to terrify you of something that doesn't exist. There's enough things to be worried about that do exist, and I just don't see that being something. One of the interesting things that about this whole thing is that it made me think about the experience when I was 5, whenever I got that book 15 years later from the Darrow experience, and after I seen that picture, I thought, well, someone else has seen something that I had seen, and that just intrigued me. So I thought back to the thing when I was 5 years old, and I was wondering, I really wanted to convince myself that I had sleep paralysis or something like that, because I didn't want to believe that the stuff was real, because how can you defend yourself against something that come through a wall, And I didn't know what I could do at the time. I didn't know how to defend. I didn't want to believe it was real. It just too terrifying to think about. So go ahead.
Brenton, can you give us the story of your first encounter when you were 5?
Yeah, that's what I was fixing to do. Well, first of all, I decided I would call. Well, let me tell you the experience first, and then I'll have to go back to that part. Well, when I was 5 years old, I lived in Marion, Indiana, and I got up one night in the middle of the night and needed to go to the bathroom. So I got up and I was walking out of my bedroom. I took a left in the hallway, and then the hallway turns right, and on down maybe 10, 15 feet, the bathroom's on the left. There was a little dresser in the hallway, and the door to the bathroom was right past that dresser, and you turn left and go in the bathroom. So I was walking down the hall, and it was dark, and as I was walking, and just about passing that dresser, this red hand came out of the wall and grabbed me by the same arm this Darrow creature grabbed me by. So this is not this is the first time I've ever been grabbed, so that's why I think my mind automatically went there, oh no, not again. But it was a red-looking hand, and it grabbed me by my arm, right at the wrist, and if you take your hand and put it over a flashlight in the dark, you know how it makes your hand look red, and you can see around the cuticles and all that?
Yeah.
Your hand glows of red, orange kind of color. That's what the whole creature looked like. But it started with the hand first. It got a hold of my left arm, and it started pulling me up on my tiptoes where I couldn't pull against it. And it came out of the wall kind of above me, and put one arm around the other arm around me, and was kind of pulling me toward the wall. And I was thinking, it's going to take me through the wall. I just knew it was going to take me through the wall. And I thought that that's what it was there to do, was pass me through the wall, and somehow in my mind I knew that it could. Well, I looked down towards my parents' bedroom, and I was trying to scream, and I couldn't. I could not scream. There was no sound would come out, and so I was extremely terrified on what I was going to do, and the only thing I could think to do was to bite it. As a 5-year-old kid, you think about it, I'll bite that thing, and so that's what I was going to do. I was going to bite it. And as I went to bite it, I got captivated looking at this hand. I was, because it pulled me up on my tiptoes, so his fingernails and everything was like directly in front of my face, where I could see it real close. And I was just I remember looking at the cuticles and the fingernails, and I don't know how long, maybe I only looked at it for like 2-3 seconds, but it seemed like a long time to me. Like time wasn't even the same. And I was just studying it, and I was like, snap out of it, bite it, And as I went to bite it, and I opened my mouth, and I was reaching to bite its hand, I seen something move out of the corner of my eye, and I looked over, and my sister was coming into the other end of the hallway, and I looked at her, and her mouth was wide open, and she was just standing there, just froze looking at this thing. And I'm telling you what, Ryan and Will, this creature could pass through a wall, but was solid enough to grab me. It was red. The whole being of it was red, and it had curled ram type horns. And I mean, that terrified me. I was 5 years old, and my sister walks in, and then, and I was going to go bite it. Okay, so then I have to stop there, because I have to go back to where I read this book, and I ran across this Darrow picture. Now, I was thinking, the first experience, I was wanting to believe, and I can't stress this enough, I was wanting to believe that I had sleep paralysis, and I dreamed that event. I had PTSD. I had nightmares for 10 years every night, from 5 years old to 15 years old. I had nightmares every single night about that thing chasing me. I was scared to sleep near a wall. I was scared of the dark. I was completely terrified. I lived my whole childhood life, and every time it came nighttime, I was in fear, and I was scared to go to bed. Okay, then anyway, here I am at 32 years old when I had read this book and seen this picture. And I thought, well, I dreamed that first thing. I was trying to convince myself it never happened. I knew the thing in Texas happened, and I knew the first thing happened, but I was going to try to make a way. I could not believe it. So I decided I'd call my sister. Now, I've got to stress this, like we were talking about, Ryan, you never talk about it. I never once in my whole life talked to my sister about that event. Never. So I thought I would call her and just say something without feeding her any information of what I remembered of it, and see if she remembered. So I called her up on the phone, and this was, many years later, from 5 to 32, however long that is, and 28 years, something like that. Well, I called my sister up, and I said, do you remember when we lived in Marion? And she instantly said to me, like it was yesterday. And I was like, oh my goodness. And then I kind of wished I hadn't called, And then she said to me, do you know the one thing I always wondered about? And then I didn't even want to know what that was, I was thinking, oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't even opened this can of worms. And I was like, no, what? And she said, what happened right after? And I'd never even thought about that. And she was a witness to this. So now that she can recall it, and she even explained to me what it looked like from her vantage point, it was sticking out, because I didn't realize it had another arm around me. I thought it had one hand on my wrist and was pulling me toward the wall, but she said it was pulling me up on my tiptoes toward the wall. And she said, what? I always wondered this one thing, and I was like, what? And she said, what happened right after? She said, you would think that we would have ran and told Mom and Dad. You think something like that, but we didn't. I don't even remember going back to bed. I don't remember nothing. So here I am with this experience, and I don't, really know what to think about that. My sister saw it, and neither one of us remember anything else.
Well, it's
Now,
interesting.
that sounds a lot like abduction to me.
Yep.
It does, and it's interesting that you and your sister never talked about it at all, ever, like, since that event. Like, how many years later was this that,
It's like 28 years later.
So you guys never spoke of it, but obviously she had recalled the event as well. I mean, she probably had, I mean, it wasn't as bad for her, but, just trying to piece together this puzzle. I mean, she knew she saw it, and I guess she couldn't comprehend it either.
Right. The one thing she did say to me, she said, I was seeing it, but not believing it. She said, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That is the way she said it to me. And that's the look that I remember on her face. It was complete shock and froze, standing there just with her mouth dropped. And she explained to me that, it was out above, kind of above me. And was pulling me up, and I did ask her. I said, "What do you think that it was going to do?" Because I always thought, my whole life, I thought it was going to take me through the wall somewhere. And so I decided I was going to ask her. I said, "What do you think it was going to do?" And she goes, She said it was going to take you through the wall, and I was thinking, why would she think that too? And I said, "Well, why do you think that?" And she said, "Because that's where it was." So she thought the same exact thing I did, that what his intentions was, and it made me wonder about kids that come up missing, and there's never a trace of it, and the windows and the doors are locked, and the baby is missing, and there's folk stories about that, that people say are mythical stories, and they're not true, but I've wondered, if it was to take me through that wall, what makes you think that you could get back?
Well, I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting that probably only Ryan will be able to appreciate. But, obviously I've never heard this story before. But me and Ryan did a music video like in 2008 or 2007. And that we had a shadow creature. Well, my wife was an actor and pulled her through the wall into another dimension. Interestingly enough. So,
and I often think about these stories about well, we don't remember what happened after, and it's kind of similar to some of the reports from people interacting with black-eyed kids, and I often ponder and on the whole scenario and think, well, maybe the fact that you don't remember going back to bed means they did get you.
Well, actually, I don't know if I should bring this up now. I just actually came across a story of a black-eyed kid encounter of a woman who did let them in, and it was two of them, and she was actually. They said that they came to collect her. That's what they said. They didn't say anything more than that, but she actually had to fight her way out of the house. I can't remember if I bookmarked it. It was only like the other day I found it. And the whole preview of the story is what happens when you let them in, right? And apparently they come to collect you. Now, what that means, what it entails, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. Like for who, for what? Right?
Yeah, that's not good news.
No, I mean,
that black-eyed kid thing, it puts it into the paranormal realm, almost demonic when they're asking you for permission, almost like they need that permission to overstep that bound. And that's the first story I've ever heard of those, where a person actually let him in, because I didn't think maybe you would survive it if you did. I didn't even want to hear it.
Well, that might be one of the only stories that got out.
It's the only one I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
So, Brenton, of course, how much prompting did you said to your sister, do you remember when we lived in Maryland?
In Marion, Indiana, yes.
Marion, Indiana, sorry.
Yes,
and
that's all I said, because I was extremely careful not to feed any information to her.
And that was all she needed, and she knew exactly what you were talking about.
Yes, correct, yes. Yeah, and then she said, after I asked her, what do you think it was going to do? and she described what it looked like from her vantage point. She said, "You know what I always wondered," and I kind of didn't want to know. You know what I mean? Because I was trying to shut the whole thing down, and I was going to try to get back to like people that never have any kind of encounter at all in their lifetime or never recall it anyway. And I was wanting to just say I dreamed it. But how can you say that when you have a witness to it?
Yeah.
So
You can't.
So, Brent, did you ever have any other paranormal experiences, or was it just these two isolated events?
I had one more, but it wasn't like physical, where it actually physically grabbed me. And it was with another shadow entity. But, that one wasn't as bad because when they physically interact with you to the point where they're grabbing you and trying to take you, that to me that was more scary. And I asked my sister if she ever had any problems sleeping, and if she was fearful at night and stuff like that. And she said that she sometimes had problems with the closet door being opened because these beings tend to use from. I don't know if you ever heard the Nancy interview on Coast to Coast, or I think it was Coast to Coast. But she had a being that would come out of her closet. And there's lots of stories about these beings coming out of closets because I believe that's where they want to open the portal so they can come in and be a little more stealthy about it. And so I thought it was strange that she had a fear of the closet door being open because maybe she was having issues that she just doesn't recall, But she said that I thought maybe it was worse for you because it was actually, had a hold of you. And
I won't be able to let my wife listen to this podcast because she has an extreme phobia about closet doors.
Oh, really? Well, that might be why. There might be something that she's blocked out and she's not remembering that of an encounter where the being comes through a closet. And there's people that say they sometimes come through. Because I collect these stories now and I put them on my YouTube channel. And I've got so many, I can't make videos out of all of them. But they sometimes come even out of like cabinets. And, they use another doorway or a closet. Well, the being in the Darrow experience opened the door above my closet door. And it didn't. I guess they didn't care about using the closet. They already had me subdued, And one of the things I was thinking about with this roar, where I do study, the Bible a lot, and I believe there's a lot of information, even if a person isn't a Christian, that the Bible's got a lot of information in it about the spirit realm, even if you don't subscribe to it, And I was looking in like Genesis where, in the beginning, where it says that God placed. There's this Garden of Eden, right? And God placed eastward. Let me see what it says here. And it says, the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put man whom he had formed. Now, the word eastward is kudim in the Hebrew, and you would think it means east, but it doesn't. It means antiquity, and it means like far past, and it has to do with time, but it also can mean east. So this word is a time and space word. So it's time and space thing what we're talking about. And Eden means pleasure. So you have a time space, and you have Eden means pleasure, and then the garden means enclosure, and that's what I wanted to get to. That it's an enclosure that Adam and Eve had, that they were able to access the spirit realm until they messed around with the tree, that they weren't supposed to. And I was talking to Will about this. When God threw them out, he did something really strange. And I thought, why would God want to do this? But it said he made them coats of skin. And once he made them this coats of skin, he was able to put them out of this enclosure that they were in. Now, I believe that they had, because it said they walked with the Lord, so they were able to go in and out of the spirit realm, and those doors, if you will, and to be able to be in that fourth dimension and then come back into the third dimension and travel back and forth like the Bible says that the devil does. He roams to and fro from the earth back to the heavens, back and forth, back and forth. Well, we lost that right to do that. God makes an enclosure for us, which is the suit of skin we got. He places us out of the garden, and you're tied to that. According to Ecclesiastes, it says you're tied to that coat of skin you got by a silver cord. Now, I believe, huh?
Well, they actually say for people who do out-of-body experiences that you're connected with a silver cord to your body.
Wow.
And if you cut that cord, you die. You're gone.
That's interesting. I didn't know that they said that, but that's exactly what the scripture says. And to me, it was interesting because here's what I wanted to get to, that roar that happened. Now, once he put man out of that fourth dimension, we weren't supposed to be playing around in there no more, okay? It's not safe, I don't believe. Well, it says at the end of it, so he drove out the man and placed at the east of the garden, so he's talking about time and space here again, of the garden, this enclosure of Eden, pleasure. Okay, he placed there cherubim, and a lot of people, when I talk about this scripture, they say the cherubim with a sword to guard the way to the tree of life. It doesn't say a cherubim with a sword. It says he placed a cherubim there, which we know is a class of angel. It's a very powerful type, greater in might and strength, like Paul says, than we are, and also higher frequency, higher vibrational, able to go in and out of the dimension. But he placed him there and a flaming sword. Now, this flaming sword thing I thought was interesting because when I looked flaming up, it meant enchanted. So these cherubims guard these dimensions. And if you notice that people that have Men in Black experiences, it's when they open some kind of portal through some ritualistic type thing or have some kind of paranormal type encounter, even more than the UFO stuff. And you all did a show on this, and that guy, he was even touching on this. But whenever people were doing something that was accessing that other dimension, these beings would show up called Men in Black. I believe that those beings are cherubim, and because they're guard that one. I have a story that someone sent me, and he was staying at a motel, and he said these angels came to him and told him to fast and pray, and there was something in the food that kept him from getting to God. So he was doing this, and he said a portal would open up, and he could send his consciousness through the portal. Well, he did this once, and it scared him, and he came back, and he did this again, and he said Men in Black showed up. It set the alarm off in the motel, and he let me listen to a tape of it too, but I didn't get the tape, and I couldn't find him no more after he shared his story. But he said these Men in Black came and shut the portal down. When he opened it up, they instantly showed up, and they did something like some electrical shot towards it and closed it, like they are there to guard you from opening or guard the way to that God's domain or the other domain or whatever you would want to call it. And so that roar, I think, when these entities come into this realm and access and try to do something with me, I believe that a higher entity popped up and shut that down.
So
because they're not supposed to.
So basically, like there's like a universal law that we're supposed to stay in this dimension. We're not allowed to go to and fro like other entities. Like we haven't deserved that right. And the body is more or less an anchor that keeps us in this dimension.
Well, supposedly that's the realm that the jinn were banished to.
Do what?
The jinn.
The jinn? What? I'm sorry, Ryan. I didn't hear you.
I just wanted to comment that perhaps it's not so much that we haven't gained the right to go back in there, but subsequently, of course, in Islam it talks about the spirits called the jinn, and they're
Right.
kind of a class of being in between man and angels, and they refuse to bow before man.
Yeah, I think
as
maybe those are the shadow people, that their terminology for it. It seems like,
Yeah, and
'cause the shadow.
that's what a lot of people ascribe to, is that shadow people are actually the jinn, and the
Right.
shadow that we see is basically when they're so close to our dimension. They're in the fourth dimension, we'll say, and when they get so close that they can actually peer across and watch us, then we see the shadowy outline of them, which is
Right.
not their actual form, but they are, in fact, they are shifters of a sort.
Basically,
And
basically, when we see shadows and they're missing their features and stuff, is that there's certain features of theirs that cannot exist in the third dimension where we are, which is why we can't see them.
Right. Or at least they can't stay long. The only other encounter I had was with a shadow being, and he was physical, but it was like he wasn't all the way there, like you're saying, Ryan. So I think you're right, man. I think that's just different terminology that people are using. We would use, I might use shadow being where people in the Muslim faith would use jinn, but we're talking about the same thing. And even
certainly,
Men in Black, I think that instead of calling them cherubim, people call them Men in Black. And I think there could be on both sides. There could be some, because sometimes when these show up, people get an evil presence feeling, and sometimes they don't. So there's obviously different groups and factions of them, and what have you.
it's interesting to know too that the jinn are also, people report them using technology quite often.
Yeah, yeah, that's bizarre. One thing that I really try to get across on my channel is that these beings, I don't know about the shadow beings. They're a little bit of a mystery. I think they are a little different than some of the other, like that red being that grabbed me, or the Darrow being. Those beings are physical. They, even though they might be higher dimensional and they can go in and out of dimension, they have bodies. And you think about in the Bible, when Jesus rose from the dead, he came to Thomas and said, "Stick your finger in my side here and feel that I'm flesh and bone." He didn't say blood, because the witnesses that are in, the Bible talks about there's three witnesses in heaven, three on earth, and you've got blood is not one of them in earth. The Bible says, I guess blood can't exist in the other realm. But he was physical. You could touch him. And when you talk about these abduction experiences, and it seems to be so much about genetics and things like that. Those beings can't exist in our realm for very long. And whenever you do hear about someone saying that they've got some kind of hybrid, but they lose their mind if they stay in this dimension, you
So,
know.
so
So I think that we can't exist in theirs very long, and they can't exist in ours very long.
So
It's
Brenton,
interesting that in the cattle mutilations, then a lot of one of the materials that is removed,
is blood.
occasionally is blood.
So Brenton,
Yeah, I think they're making themselves the coats of skin that God made, kind of thing. They have to have an enclosure to be in if they're going to be in this long. That because I think that you have to duplicate what the Garden of Eden's saying. If you study that out, you have to be in some kind of enclosure, or you can't exist. Your soul, a disembodied spirit. There's some, and that might be what some of the shadow beings are. That I noticed, like in some of the stories, when Jesus cast a demon out, they beg him not to throw him out and have nowhere to go. They even call it their country or their home. They say, "Can we go into the pigs?" And Jesus, gave him permission, and they would flee out of that person and go into a pig. Why do they want to be in some kind of body so much? And then some of them do have bodies. Now, Darrow had a body, and he had technology. And how you piece all that together, that's a mystery. But go ahead, Will. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
well, that's okay. So Brenton, your first experience, it was the belief that the Darrow wanted to pull you into a wall, which was like another dimension. In your second experience, again, we have a Darrow, we have a Shadow Man seemingly working together to bring you once again through a portal.
Right.
So it would seem that something wants you in this other dimension. For what reasons, nobody really knows. But are you worried that this is going to happen again? Like they're going to take another attempt?
Sometimes, yeah. Yeah, that's a little bit concerning at times. But I have, and this is where it gets into where people get upset with me and things like that, because I I have a lot of people contact me, and I told them the only way I was able to defeat it is what I have learned. And whether this is my own thinking, it works for me. And so I'm not trying to Bible beat anybody, and be dogmatic and telling, people, I'm not saying anybody's going to hell or nothing like that. I'm not trying to go there with it, is what I'm saying. But the what I found in the scriptures and with other cases that people send me was that I made a video called "The Real Hollow Earth," and the scriptures. I ran across the scripture. It said that Jesus' name has authority in the heavenly, which is the other dimension, on earth, which is the terrestrial in the Greek, and then it said in the earth, which in the Greek means subterranean. So this Darrow entity, I believe, comes from subterranean realms. The devil entity, I think, comes from the heavenly realms, and then on earth is when they come to me. So whenever I've had these experiences where something has tried to come at me, which I have had, and it not get physical, I basically said Jesus' name and they flee. And I've had many stories sent to me where this guy had these grays coming to him, and he would wake up and they would be in his room. And he said he would say Jesus' name, and it would be like hitting them with a baseball bat. It would actually hit them, and they would physically look like they were being hit, and it would knock them back like 3 feet. And he would say Jesus' name again, and boom, it would knock them back again until they're outside looking in through the window. So and I have another case where a guy doesn't really believe that so much, so he's kind of teetering on the fence, and he got abducted by some gel-looking creatures that had light within them, and they took him, his friend, and the truck they were in, and took them all and put them 70 miles away. The gas gauge was not moved. They had like a half a tank of gas. They got out of the truck out on a logging road. They were all loggers, and they were taking a whiz and smoking a cigarette. Well, they seen this big craft come up, and it was like 4 miles wide, and basically it was like a flash of lightning hit, and then they all woke up 60 to 70 miles away in the vehicle. The battery was dead. The bulbs were melted into the sockets of every bulb in the car. There was no power whatsoever, and there was like a web and a gel-like substance over the whole vehicle, and when they would try to grab the web stuff, it would disintegrate into nothing. And every one of them had a hole in the small of their back that never healed. And this was like in 78, I think, 1978, and they still have the hole. They even sent me a picture of the hole, but the picture they sent me had too much butt crack in it, so I didn't want to post it. You know what I mean? So I got a little close, pan up a little, Well, but anyway, I mean, that's what happened to them, and it took their vehicle and all. So don't tell me these things don't have some technology or some kind of way to even move a physical object other than, just your physical body. They moved the whole thing. All of them are in agreement with what happened. And the gas gauge was not moved. They still had a half a tank of gas. And then the guy, his name is Martin, and I've got a video on my channel about it, and he got visited every night. Well, he started getting scared about it. After he shared his story, they started attacking him. But the ironic thing about it is there was always paranormal activity. Every time someone has these alien encounters, there's always other paranormal activity. And you can look at other cases like there's one Stan Romanek case. He's got shadow beings, pictures of him holding the remote, by his recliner. And the alien grays looking in through his window and through the spindles of the deck and things like that. And I believe that they're real pictures too. I don't think he's faking it. But he said his house became haunted. Well, So whenever I hear someone talking about alien abduction, I know that they also have haunting stuff in their house. And anyway, he called me and he was terrified because these beings were back. And after he shared it, and he said they're mad. And so I shared with him, what I know that helped. And I said, you need to believe in Jesus and the authority of his name. And he did. He kind of halfway went there, not all the way. And he is able to stop the activity because these things were moving his dishes around. And I said, look, man, these things are not coming across a galaxy to move your dishes. That just don't make sense. They're posing as aliens when they're actually, they're putting a different label on it now. These are the same things that Ezekiel saw. They're the same things that Elijah and Elisha saw. There was a whole army got abducted and took to another town in the Bible. A mass abduction, the whole army. And so, go ahead.
Well, what it sounds like, I mean, if you were to look at it from an objective kind of viewpoint, is that, you have these different, where was I going with this? Train of thought, just got, hang on a second.
Different titles on it.
Well, there's that, no, what it is that, if you take Earth and you take the human race, right, and it's like they say that we're made in God's image or whatever, and it seems like all these different entities, whether it be alien, whether it be demonic, jinn, whatever you want to call it, you have these different entities that try to, pierce through our veil to get to us for some reason. And we've theorized that it could be for our bodies because they want to be here. It seems like that is key to staying here. It's our body. It's our skins.
Right.
So you have these different entities. They all want to get in here. They're from a different dimension, supposedly. But it seems like when people say Jesus' name or they bring it up, like you said, and like in the exorcisms, they use this too, and they drive it out. But it would stand to reason then that God actually made this place just for us because we're in his image, we're his people. The other entities probably are not. And it would seem that once we call on him, it's like we set up a flag. It's like, hey, these invaders are coming in to ruin this experiment or this creation that you have for us. And he comes down and he drives them out because this is his place, this is his people, it's his experiment. And these.
Right. You think about my Darrow encounter. I mean, this roar happens. That's how I heard it was a roar. Now you take like at the when Moses went up and got the 10 Commandments, came down and stuff like that. That God would descend down onto the mountain, and it would sound kind of like when they describe it like a big UFO kind of thing. Whether. I don't know. I think that there are such craft. I think they're extra dimensional because the guy who told me about his experience, he said that the craft 4 miles wide could shrink down to nothing, and then shrink back out, or expand back out, and the entities could shrink down and go through that hole in their back. But where was I going with this? I'm sorry.
Well, I think the main factor here, because they have done lots of research and studies on the power of prayer, and the result of all those clinical studies, and I mean they did some very scientific, very much by the scientific method studies on prayer and the effects that prayer has on healing and fertility and a whole range of different things, and They prove that prayer does work. But the interesting factor was that there was no single belief system or religious system that seemed to matter. They all worked just fine. And in fact, in a control group that used a group of atheists who were simply praying and using the power, the will of their own individual willpower, were able to affect the same results as the most pious Christians, Muslims, Jews, and the most well-practiced monks who are very we'll say are experts at this kind of thing. and it didn't really matter which group was performing. They all kind of got the same results. So I think, you know, if you need to generate that kind of willpower through the channels of faith, then and that works. I think that's, you know, definitely an angle that people can take. But you know, for those who out there who really, you know, can't subscribe to the idea of a higher deity, who's, you know, looking down on us and protecting us, kind of a thing. I think, you know, the you know, rely on your own personal power. You know, find it within yourself. Whether you have to do it through the pathways of faith or your own personal inner strength, you know, I think we have it within us to force these experiences away.
Genuine
you know,
belief, basically.
it's a genuine belief in yourself. It's your own personal willpower, I think.
Kind of like
is what's important here.
like when miracles were dissected.
Now, to be honest, Ryan, I don't like to hide any information I have on what I've collected, because it's not fair and it's not right. Okay, I know that the name of Jesus works. I do know that, and I do have some cases where people got mad and yelled, you know, leave me alone. And I think that kind of comes into God's protection, in my opinion. But they get left alone for a little bit, where like with Martin's case, he had them go away and he was teetering, not, you know, subscribing to what I believe. They came back to his house, and this time they didn't show up like they did the times before in the same form. They showed up as a reptilian looking thing, and they started attacking his children. So he woke up, and his children were screaming and you know, in terror. And he woke up screaming. His wife woke up screaming. Whatever all that was, you know, I don't know. But he basically came out of his bedroom, and there was 3 of these reptile-looking creatures that was in the hallway. You know, whether they were leaving the room of the kids or what, I don't know. But he said he went up and he slapped one of them. He hit it, and he said it felt wet and scaly, and they took off and they ran from him, and they teleported out when they got to the living room. So he's able to, you know, run them out. I don't know why they would necessarily be scared if they were that, you know, advanced and what have you. But our will seems to matter. I'll just be honest about it. Our will seems to matter. And whether that's a God-given right, I don't know. But our will, our permission that we give. There's other cases where I know that people give permission to these entities and they don't remember it until later, and things like that. But yeah, you're right. I think the law, just caring about other people and praying for them might have some kind of effect for sure. Because I've heard those studies too, and it was interesting. So
basically, will matters, and that's me. So I matter.
There you go.
And with that said, if there's anything that you want to add there, Brenton, like where people can find your videos and stuff like that, that would be a good time to shoot that out.
All right. Yes. My name is Brenton Sawin, and you can find all my videos that I've made, and more coming all the time. A lot of them being worked on at the moment, and I've got a lot of stories backed up too. So come see. I'll be making them on a regular basis, but I have the Darrow story there, the story when I was 5. I've got the story of Martin there, and Men in Black stories, the Ashwangs from Philippines, all kinds of stuff. And my name is Brenton Sawin, Brenton, and Sawin. You type my name in, you'll find my channel, and I appreciate it if you subscribe. And also, I have a Facebook button there where I give you a little bit of updates on things that on how I made a video, or just different updates, even like this show here that I'm Effed Up Stories. And I will be putting some links to you all's channel in some of my videos, and because I really like you all's story, and I like how you're objective about stuff, Ryan, and I appreciate both of you all, and I like it how you all approach a story. Just you got a good style, and I really believe that you all's show is going to be successful. So hang in there. And I went to a top 3 university in the country for broadcasting, and I think you all's show has got a lot of potential to be very successful. So I just want to encourage you all to keep going and keep working at it, and you'll continue to grow.
Well, Brenton, I appreciate that very much, and thanks for coming on to the show and sharing your story. And for everybody else out there, if you have any paranormal stories, videos, or pictures, we want to see it, hear it, whatever. So if you could go to our official website at www.effedupstories.com, that's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to submissions and submit your stuff. You'll get it on the website and possibly in a podcast. And with that said, thanks for tuning in. This is Will Pender signing out.
And from myself, Brenton, thank you so much for sharing your story. Very interesting stuff I've never heard before. And, I think it's great when people talk about these experiences that are just way, way off in left field. And I think it really needs to come to the forefront. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. To everybody out there, thanks for listening. Ryan Sharp signing out.